On June 13, 2025, the world was stunned by the news that 200 Israeli fighter jets had attacked Iran. Shortly after, Iran responded by sending over 100 drones toward Israel. Thus began one of the biggest crises in the recent history of the Middle East. For several days, the two nations constantly attacked each other, resulting in widespread destruction and casualties on both sides. The world began to fear that the conflict would ignite the already unstable region. Suddenly, the United States threatened to become directly involved, and a few days later, they heavily bombed Iranian nuclear facilities. Yes, most of these explosions occurred in sites with radioactive materials that could potentially store nuclear bombs. Are we witnessing the beginning of World War III? How did the conflict between these two countries begin? Why did these attacks happen now? And what could happen next? We'll cover all of this by the end of this video. The best way to understand the start of the conflict between Iran and Israel is to go back to the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, in a territory in the Middle East called Palestine. To simplify, imagine the world as a huge neighborhood. One of the oldest streets in this neighborhood is the Middle East. In 1948, the Neighborhood Association, the UN, decided that part of a lot on this street would be given to a family that had recently suffered greatly, the Jewish people. This idea wasn't new. In the late 19th century, a Jewish nationalist movement called Zionism arose, advocating for the creation of a Jewish country. The most radical wing argued the ideal location was Palestine, being the ancestral home of the Jewish people, Canaan. Many years ago, the Jews left the region due to Roman persecution. With time, the region became increasingly occupied by Arab peoples, the Palestinians, who had lived there for many generations. Following the Holocaust, 1939-1945, the idea of creating a Jewish state gained international support. The newly created UN proposed that a part of Palestine be allocated to the Jewish people. The Palestinians were completely against this division. Despite the opposition, the State of Israel was declared in 1948. The relationship between Israel and its neighbors has been contentious from day one. Palestinian groups call the forced expulsion and loss of land the Nakba, catastrophe. Furthermore, many Arab neighbors viewed Palestine as Arab land. Israel's strength lies in its partnership with the United States, one of the neighborhood's most powerful residents. The Middle East is also rich in oil, and powerful global residents want to increase their influence over the region's peoples. The entry of Iran into this conflict began in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution. The US-friendly government was deposed, and Iran became an Islamic theocracy. The new supreme leader, the Ayatollah, despises US interference and believes that the creation of Israel is just a US strategy to increase its influence. Thus, Iran became one of Israel's fiercest enemies. By the 21st century, 2015, Israel and Iran were locked in a Cold War, with the situation complicated by violent groups like Hamas, Gaza Strip, and Hezbollah, Lebanon, both financed by Iran. This is an existential conflict. The Ayatollah believes Israel should cease to exist, while Israel seeks to expand its influence. This conflict brings us to the issue of nuclear weapons. Israel attacked Iran, claiming to prevent its enemy from acquiring nuclear capabilities. Iran signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, in the 1960s, and for a long time was compliant. In 2015, major global powers offered Iran a deal. Restrictions on its nuclear program would be eased in exchange for lifting commercial sanctions. Iran agreed. However, in 2018, the US abandoned the agreement and the sanctions were reactivated. Iran subsequently began to violate some NPT rules, leading to international whispers that it was hiding something, perhaps nuclear weapons. This is when Israel began bombing Iranian nuclear facilities. But why did Israel attack now? The answer lies in the conflict with Hamas and the political situation of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a violent attack on Israel. Israel responded by heavily bombing and invading the Gaza Strip, aiming to destroy Hamas completely. The ensuing humanitarian crisis was immense. 2 million people displaced, hospitals destroyed, and widespread famine. Most of the international community condemned Israel's actions as disproportionate. Following months of attacks, Hamas was largely defeated. Israel then weakened Hezbollah. Iran, having lost its proxy groups and facing internal opposition and the loss of its Syrian ally, was in a vulnerable position. Israel saw a unique opportunity to act before Iran signed a new nuclear deal with the US, which would make military action unjustifiable. But why didn't Israel simply support the new agreement to prevent nuclearization peacefully? Many analysts suggest that Netanyahu had political motives for prolonging the conflict. Facing corruption charges and protests, the state of war kept the legal crisis away from his government. Attacking a major enemy like Iran would show strength, satisfy nationalist groups, and keep the focus off his legal and political troubles. Israel attacked before the deal could be signed. Iran retaliated, Israel counterattacked, and eventually the US intervened by bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, forcing a ceasefire. Iran was left weakened. Its attacks caused casualties, but the vast majority of its weapons were blocked by the US-funded Iron Dome defense system. China and Russia, Iran's supposed allies, stayed out of the conflict, preventing a global escalation. Now the question is, what's next? If nothing changes, Iran has every motivation to accelerate its nuclear program to regain respect and deter its aggressive enemy. And what about the nuclear double standard? Israel has never signed the NPT. While it never confirms nor denies possessing nuclear weapons, intelligence suggests it has between 80 and 90 nuclear warheads. Thus, Israel's strong condemnation of Iran's nuclear ambitions is, frankly, hypocritical. We have two historical enemies arming themselves, led by an Ayatollah determined to build nuclear weapons and a controversial prime minister who seemingly uses wars to cling to power. The problem is global. With conflicts in Ukraine, increasing defense spending in Europe, and a weakened UN, the world lacks a central mediator. The UN, created in 1945, needs to be updated. Perhaps it's time for the world to look to regions like South America, which is relatively at peace, for new models of diplomacy. This was the Forgotten Files explanation of the Iran-Israel conflict.